This is a graph of the percentage of free and reduced lunch kids versus reading for schools in Jeffco. Schools and districts with more kids in poverty have lower test scores. This is a line of correlation. It shows the best fit to the data, an average score for the specific percentage of free and reduced lunch. Jeffco has a wide range in school demographics. Some schools have over 90% free and reduced lunch kids, while others have less than 5%. On the right is a calculation of the average reading score for all the schools in the graph on the left. Here are similar graphs for Dogco. Dogco has very different demographics than Jeffco, with most schools having a percentage of free and reduced lunch less than 30%. On the right is a graph of the calculated average reading score for the schools in the graph on the left. Because Dogco has more schools with fewer percentage of free and reduced lunch kids, the average reading score is higher, 80.1% versus 75.9% for Jeffco. Is Dogco more successful than Jeffco, or do they just have fewer free and reduced lunch kids? We need to compare schools with similar demographics to help answer these questions. We come back to the graph of the percentage of free and reduced lunch versus reading for Jeffco. Now we add the Dogco schools on the same graph. We remove the Dogco schools, then add them again. Watch how the line of correlation drops in the low percentage of free and reduced lunch schools when we add the Dogco schools. Now we show the Dogco data only, and we add the Jeffco schools. Watch how the line of correlation rises for the schools with higher free and reduced lunch kids. To see how Dogco schools compare to Jeffco schools with similar demographics, we will now freeze the correlation line to the Jeffco data. When we add Dogco data, now this line will not move. When we add the Dogco schools, nearly all schools sit below the Jeffco correlation line. In fact, only the Dogco schools with the least percentage of free and reduced lunch kids barely sit above the Jeffco correlation line. For the same demographics, nearly all Dogco schools, on average, score lower than Jeffco schools. Now we remove the schools with the higher percentage of free and reduced lunch. Watch the schools drop off the correlation graph on the left. Watch the average reading scores change as we change the schools used in the average calculation. Let's pause at the point where all the schools have a percentage of free and reduced lunch less than about 50%. Now the average reading scores for Dogco and Jeffco schools is nearly the same at about 82%. We remove more schools until all the schools have less than 29% free and reduced lunch. This captures most of the schools in Dogco and also many schools in Jeffco. Enrollment in these schools for Jeffco is 46,000 and Dogco 59,000 kids. Let's zoom in and compare more closely. Nearly all Dogco schools score below the averages for Jeffco schools. The average reading values for these Jeffco schools is also higher than for these Dogco schools. In 2012, the difference between the average scores for these schools was 0.2%. In 2013, the difference between the average scores for these schools was 1%. In 2014, average scores differed by a full 3%. Jeffco scores have been rising, while Dogco scores have been falling.